Hello, my name is Jorge Shaft, and you are listening to The Happening. This is Relaks Radio, and I have got an exciting show planned for you today. I'm going to be talking about the Batley and Spen by-election, which just happened. Very exciting. I'm going to be talking about generally kind of jobs, and specifically like the US sort of job market, sort of labor shortage, but also all about just a bit of a general rant about kind of jobs in general. And finally, I'm going to be rounding it off with just a discussion about the Euros, because football's happening, and I guess I need to talk about football now. Anyway, let's get this show started. So, in this past week, you might have noticed, if you're looking at the news, if you're watching the, just anything really, you'd have seen that there was a by-election in Batley and Spen, which is sort of an area in Yorkshire. It's a couple of small towns, all kinds of cool. But you might remember that last week I talked about the Batley and Spen by-election, because it's been a fascinating race all through. The Labour Party candidate, for example, was Kim Leadbeater, who is the sister of a former MP of that area, of Batley and Spen. Her name was Jo Cox, though, and Jo Cox was murdered in 2016, just a week before the EU referendum. It was a whole thing. It was really, really sad. Like, she just murdered right in the street. And now her sister was running. Running up against her was a no-name, no-face conservative person who, who cares. But running for third, and running, as like a bit of a spoiler candidate, was George Galloway. George Galloway is, I'll put it like this, a storied man. A man with many twists and turns throughout his, career, if you can call it that. And he was running a very, very acrid, hostile even, campaign for the seat. Last week I talked about a bunch of things that were going on there. From George Galloway supporters verbally abusing and basically chasing down Kim Leadbeater as she was walking to her car, just like on the streets, which was really awful. I talked about how there was like fake leaflets that were circulating around saying that, oh, hey, yeah, we're Labour and we believe in, nonsense things that Labour actually doesn't believe in. But it would be hella unpopular if we did believe that, right? And then, of course, about the fact that it looked like at that time that the Conservatives were going to win basically by default, because I think the guy was doing it happened in this space. Well, I have some good news. Labour won. Well, it's good news in my opinion. Labour won. Kim Leadbeater has won the constituency. She won with 13,296 votes, which is 35% of the overall kind of voting, and beat the Conservative Ryan Stephenson, who had 12,973 votes, which, if you do like your quick maths, you realize that it's just 323 votes was the difference between winning and losing, which is pretty damn close. George Galloway running in a distant third with 8,264 votes, which is, it's been interesting, actually. A little side note that somebody pointed out to me is that George Galloway doesn't really exceed by very much the percentage of the Muslim vote in a seat. And the same thing has happened here. The population of Batley and Spen is about 20%, and George Galloway got a little bit above that. And that's where I think I'm going to start, sort of discussing what we've seen happen, because it's quite a remarkable thing, really. So the Muslim vote in Britain has long been a very, very reliable, solid sort of Labour vote. It makes sense. The Conservative Party is running on a platform of let's be horrendous and evil to Muslims, and Labour's running on a platform of let's not do that. That would be kind of evil. Why would we do that? And so, of course, most of the time they vote for Labour. But over the past couple of elections, and specifically now, over the past few years, a lot of Muslims in Britain have been feeling very just taken for granted. They've been feeling very, well, we always vote Labour, and then Labour always doesn't do anything with it. It's a similar story to what we've been hearing from like the north of England now for the past few years, as a bunch of those seats fell and voted for the Conservatives. In fact, I've got like the map of the election, the last election result, and you see that like in the north there's like a lot of blue there that really wasn't there before. It's the same sort of attitude, just like, oh, Labour's like supposed to be our champions, but then they didn't listen, and so now we are going to punish them by voting for someone else. In the north, they decided to vote for the Conservatives because of various sort of cultural reasons. But in Batley and Spen, in this by-election, they decided to go support George Galloway, which also is fair enough, actually. I can't really blame it too hard, because George Galloway was really running on like their issues. He's going like, hey, Palestine, like that. That really was awful. And yet Labour doesn't do anything about it. They're just saying, they sometimes go and say, oh, gee, we should really be like, doing something about like Israel killing children in Palestine. But let's not say that too loudly. Let's just kind of like, be chill over psychopaths murdering civilians. That's not very all right. And so a lot of people thought like, yeah, that's a real problem. We should vote for George Galloway. But Labour's in a bit of a catch-22 on that. Because, as someone actually pointed out in this past week, I've been talking a lot, you might have noticed, is that when the Indian government attacked Kashmir, which is a majority Muslim region, Labour was stuck to either condemn the attack, in which case they'd lose the Hindu vote, or they would support the attack, or say nothing, both of which is, hey, you're being silent on an invading force killing Muslims. Why should Muslims support you then? And then the same with Palestine was, when Israel was attacking Palestine, if you say something against it, then all the accusations of anti-Semitism that was so damaging for Labour before, they're all going to come back. But if you don't say anything, then again, Muslims will rightly point out, hey, you're being silent on Muslims across the world being murdered. That's not okay. I'd say this is like an outcome of identity politics, of the whole playing up, having all the sort of going explicitly for the politics of like all the minorities, banding together to beat the majority. But I'm not that convinced about that. What I'm much more convinced at, though, is that it's a very unfortunate kind of vicious cycle thing about one simple thing. Labour's not in power. Think about it. Even if, say, at the time it was Jeremy Corbyn, had like the best intentions and like the best, like, wanted to do everything right when India was attacking Kashmir. All right, what's he going to do? He's going to say some words on a TV screen, which he did. And then what's he going to do? Like, he wasn't prime minister. He wasn't in a position to then go like, hey, I'm going to do like sanctions on India or anything like that. He can't. He's opposition leader. And we've seen a lot of, I think we're seeing a lot of that happening again. Like, Israel attacks Palestine, Labour condemned it, which they did. Not very loudly, but they did. But, what else are they going to do? It's like, okay, yeah, we think this really sucks. Man, it would be really cool if we were in power and could actually do something. But the Tories have an 80-seat majority, so I guess we have to lump it. What are the Tories going to do? Well, the Tories don't have to answer that question, though, because they don't position themselves as being the party that, cares. Tories walk around and go, yeah, we don't care. Screw you. Vote for us anyway. And so nobody expects them to stand up for anything right or anything good, because of course they don't. They often are the problem. But ultimately, the Batley and Spen by-election, even though there's these worries, even though there's this problem with the kind of the Muslim vote splitting off from Labour, and there were more little things going on, there were a bunch of far-right candidates, which is really appalling for a seat where a far-right person murdered their MP 5 years ago. And there was also all kinds of really bad things to say about the Tory strategy of just if we stay really silent and don't say anything, then we'll just coast by. But ultimately, it was a good day, in my opinion. Thursday was good. Kim led beat her by every account, by every kind of, in every article and in every video and in every appearance. You can tell. You can just tell. Yeah, she's a good person. She is someone who, has the right mindset, if you will, to be an MP. She has the right attitude to be hey, yeah, representing people and taking care of problems. That's what I want to do. And hey, guess what? I actually really care about the Yorkshire towns I grew up in, because I'm from this area and I'm not some Scotsman who lives in London who's parachuted in to be a mess. So it was a good day, and I'm happy with the result. And I'm happy with the result because of one extra thing as well. George Galloway, as if it wasn't obvious enough that he was being there only to be a spoiler candidate, contested the election result. He decided to go the Donald Trump route of, oh no, I didn't win, and neither did the Tory. It must be rigged. It's corrupt. Really funny to me. It's oh no, I didn't mess up with the country a little bit more and put a mindless foot soldier for the Tories in charge. Oh no, I'm going to contest, even though I'm distantly in third place with only 8,000 votes. Woo! So yeah, I smiled a lot on Thursday, and I hope you did too. If you didn't, though, let me know why. Or maybe if you did smile, let me know as well. I am streaming, I believe, on Facebook, YouTube, and on TikTok, maybe. I know that we're streaming on multiple platforms today. Very, very nice, very exciting. I always make a point of looking at the Facebook comments, and so, I'm looking forward to having a snazzy little time with that. However, in the meantime, and in between time, I think we should skip over to our next subject. And I'm going to go with the second subject I talked about, which is Labour. I'm not talking about Labour as in the party, I'm talking Labour as in the workforce. I have CNN Business up for this, because the United States has been the loudest about this whole thing. They've got a little article, it's titled, yes, there's a labor shortage, but hiring is surging. Here's why. Okay. And there's a whole slew of similar things. And I'd go into all the detail and depth on like each individual one, but it's just unnecessary. What we're seeing is, here's what it is in summary. All of the sort of bars, restaurants, resorts, the entertainment and the hospitality sectors, the hotels, all of them lot want to hire people in the US. So there's a pro tip for you. If you want to get a job in the US quick, there's a route to go down. So they're like really mass hiring, but then they're also going like, oh, but there's not enough people who are like applying for the jobs. Oh no, what are we going to do? And I just find the whole thing, how do I put it? A happy problem. Absurd, silly. Like, people who shouldn't be complaining. Because here's why. And I'm really surprised nobody's talking about this. But last year, several million people died of a disease. I know, right? Yeah, it must seem like distant memories now, Remember, you had to like wear a mask, and there was like a deadly virus called coronavirus or COVID-19 that was rampaging around, and like hundreds of thousands of people were dying really fast. Oh wait, what's that? It's still happening? Oh, okay. Why are people wanting to work in these sectors then? Like, why do you want to work in like a restaurant when like you think like, yeah, but the deadly disease is still running around and people are still dying of COVID-19. Even if you were okay with that, you'd also be looking like, man, but loads and loads of people died. Now here's a bit of basic Thomas Malthus for you, which, if you want to know what I think of that book in general, is also on the Relaks Radio Facebook page. Make sure to check it out. Kind of older now, but like, interesting book. Anyway, but like the basic premise of Malthus is like, oh, when like people die, then there's more for the rest of us. Don't you think that might apply for jobs too? Like, oh yeah, the manager died. Now we need a new manager. Oh wait, somebody has become now the new manager. And that person who's now a new manager doesn't want to take up the bad, awful job that they had before. So why would you want to then go and sign up for the bad, awful job? And a lot of that's been going on. I'm really surprised that like no one's talking about that. It's one of those things where, and I'm going to reserve this for later, I've been noticing a lot of how like the way people talk about economics and the way they talk about, oh, why is X happening? Why is X company rising, but Y company falling, etc., etc. It's like, it seems really, really disconnected and almost sociopathically like uninterested on like reality on the ground, if that makes any sense. So, like, for example, this labor shortage, they talk a lot about, oh, the wages. And it's like, oh yeah, wages are not high enough. Although they're not talking about that enough either. They talk about things like, oh, people are like, uninterested in working, and all these businesses are really struggling. But they don't talk about the fact that it's like, yeah, millions of people died last year. There were more millions died last year than usual. In fact, that disease is still rampaging around. And a lot of people are still worried. Like just 2 nights ago, I was chatting with someone who I kind of know, who was just like, yeah, I'm still self-isolating though, because I'm still vulnerable. I'm like the one carer for my parents who are in like the highest risk category for COVID. And you can't blame him. And you can't blame I know a lot of other people in a very similar position as well. And you also, even if they're not in that, you can't blame people for going, we want hazard pay. We want to be paid more for, interacting with the public while this deadly disease is going around killing people. As I said, none of that is unreasonable. None of that is wrong. And then it compounds even further when you find out that in 2020, there was basically a record number of people who retired. If I remember that in some sectors, it was like a quarter more people retired. No, often early retired in 2020 compared to usual. And you look into it and you see, like, yeah, it makes sense because, they were furloughed, like they're at home, and they're thinking like, well, what have I got now? 2 more years though, and I'm going to be furloughed for like 1 year just to go back to work for like 6 months. Nah, screw that, I'm just going to retire early. And so a lot of people did that as well. So when you combine those two factors, you combine the deaths, combine the fact that people were, retiring early, you add in the fact that a lot of people were thinking or acting on the idea of like, yeah, let's self-isolate or not put ourselves at risk, or at least demand like extra hazard pay for putting ourselves, exposing ourselves to the public, then, color me surprised that a lot of people look to the lowest paid, the least secure, the least, sociable jobs in the nation and go, yeah, no. And just go, yeah, no. I've got better things to do. And better things to do is actually something I didn't even mention. 2020, for all of its problems, saw a record number of new small businesses set up. Like a lot of people were, in lockdown at home and decided to go, hey, let's start a new knitting business or a new podcast or a new, window cleaning service. Because I've always been like weirdly passionate on window cleaning, this sort of thing. And, it doesn't take that many more of these businesses to be somewhat more successful, to now have like loads of people who are interested in going to regular jobs again. Because now they've got like the dream of their own boss and their own ideas and all that stuff. But it just feeds in then. If you're like the restaurant who wants to hire more waiters, but not pay them anything more than you normally would. And in the US, that's already like super low because they don't pay wage. Normally, they pay them like a wage, but it's like below minimum, which is horrendous already. But then they have this expectation of like, oh, but you do well and you get like tips that then like add more and more and more, which is just self-evidently ridiculous. I hope I don't need to explain why that's a really awful business model. And that's actually not that far off from like a lot of other these service jobs. Porters are the same thing where they're like, oh yeah, you don't get paid like that much, but people are just gonna like tip you. They're just gonna be nice and they'll keep you alive with more money because they have a conscience. So ultimately, I've got a bit of a line that I know people are not gonna like. I'm gonna say it anyway, which is, this is a happy problem. Oh, you've got a labor shortage. Oh no, people actually need to are actually demanding like more money and better living conditions to do jobs. Good. It's about time we've seen a higher standard of living for the average person. About time we got people, turning around and saying, hey, I actually have my own options now. This is the 21st century. I don't need to work for like forever and forever and forever for one company because there's literally no other choice. And like that's the only option I have available. No, I could like go on the internet and stream Twitch videos now. I could start my own small business, or I could even move somewhere. Like, that's excellent. That's fantastic. I want to see people, know their worth. One little factoid I never tire of pointing out is that the average American, if they were still at the same economic level that they were in 1970, right? If they were at the same kind of like standard, that they were at the time, they would have $4,000 per year more. 4,000. 70% of Americans can't afford a $500 emergency. I'm just putting that out there. Just like $500 of emergency, bankrupt. Oh, by the way, should I mention the fact that they don't have universal healthcare? Should I mention the fact that the diseases of despair, if you will, suicide, drugs, opioids, alcoholism, is skyrocketing up and up and up, as is nihilism, disengagement with the society, partisanship, and radical sort of politics, all shooting up and up and up. Oh, and completely unrelated, billionaires added $1 trillion to their wealth over the course of 2020. It was about $1 trillion. While the rest of the country lost their jobs en masse and lost billions in income. Just putting it out there, completely unrelated to anything. So yeah, about damn time we've had people shift the balance just a little bit, I'm always somebody who kind of has like this innate idea of just like the average person, like normal people should, have like a purpose in life. I always have the thought of just like, if you're not giving the majority of people, or at least like a big majority of people of your country, like a reason to support it, if you're not giving it them like some kind of benefit, then why should they? And that applies not only for countries and parties, political systems, but also applies to businesses as well. And I know this sounds like really bad, and I know that like right wingers are often going to say like, "Oh, look at the communist," but like, if you are running your own business but can't afford to pay your workers, then why should you have that business? Why should the workers, live like below the minimum wage, live below like a good standard of living, just to work for you to make your dream be real? No, like that's really absurd. That's just self-evidently not right. And so yeah, labor shortage, best thing that's happened in a long time. But what do you think? I have got, a Facebook comments section, which I always make sure to read. We've also being, as the little banner is saying, you can follow us on Instagram, Twitter, and on TikTok. We even have our own app, which you can download, and which I highly recommend for, listening to all the good Relaks Radio programs. However, I think that right now, I have been talking myself to some kind of exhaustion. I am looking at like this bottle of water I've got here. Really tasty. Good. One of the good things about being at home at the moment. And so I think I'm going to take a drink and let some other people have a chat. And I'll catch you all again then, very, very soon. See ya.
Now, there's a lot of conversation around who pays. there's a lot of conversation around who pays more taxes, if it is the rich or if it is the poor, right? But when you are basically going out and during a day, you go to a restaurant, you have to pay taxes there. If you buy a car, you have to pay taxes there. So why is it even a conversation that, the rich pay less taxes or the poor pay more taxes? Why is it a conversation like that?
Because it's true, the rich generally pay less tax. A rich person walks into a Tesco's or a Sainsbury's, they're not going to get a different bill than another person, right? They're still going to pay the same VAT on those goods, they're still going to pay the same thing. So that's all the same. However, the differences come in if you can pay yourself from your own company, you can structure it in a way that you pay less income tax through paying a bit of salary, paying dividends and so forth, and then also deferring income. Also, your pension payments or contributions can be different. So that increases your tax sort of gap, if you want to use it that way. Where a PAYE person just gets paid salary and bonus. And now those are the most highly taxed sources of income in the UK, definitely, in the UK. We've seen it, right? If an owner of a large public traded company does something wrong, irrelevant of what that company does or how valuable that company is, the stock generally falls into a pool of nothing, right? Because in a public company where the stock is traded openly on the stock exchange, the value of that stock is driven by supply and demand, it's driven by emotion, it's driven by news, it's driven by quite a lot of variables over and above the actual accounting or total net worth of that company. I mean, we've seen it, right? If an owner of a large public traded company does something wrong, irrelevant of what that company does or how valuable that company is, the stock generally falls into a pool of nothing, right? And the company may still have value, it may still be doing quite a good things.
Hello again, and welcome back to That Happening. My name is Jorge Shaft, and I've been talking about quite a bit of things recently. I've been talking about the Batley and Spen by-election, as and all of the kind of, if you will, all of the interesting analysis about that, ultimately concluding that it was a good using. I then also talked about the US labor shortage, though I didn't talk that much about the standard mainstream discussion about it. I talked more about the kind of, hey, look at the reality of what's been going on, look at the factors that somehow is weirdly silent and no one's really talking about, which explain why it's happening much better. And I also concluded that was also a good thing. I'm in a good news week mood today. What can I say? And we can continue that with the little end of this segment. But first, I want to tell you a story. I do, actually, yeah. So, in the First World War, I know, the beginning of a good story, the First World War, right? But in the First World War, the UK discovered a new sort of ingredient to put into explosives. They found a chemical that goes boom, and it's really good in bombs to kill people. So they started to put in all the bombs, and they sent it to this chemical went into, it was called a DNT if I remember right, but the exact name of this isn't what matters here. But they sent this thing into the factories. And because of the First World War, it's mostly women who are doing the work of building the bombs, making the ammunition, all that stuff. And so they were starting to work with this stuff. And despite the fact it was winter, and despite the fact that, there was like food shortages and all that, the women reported feeling very hot. They started to report feeling ravenously hungry. Even though as factory workers, they were actually not badly fed. They started to report wanting to like cool down the factory, even though it was winter and it was already like freezing cold. The women in general who were working with this stuff started to lose weight really fast. And one even died right in the factory floor. Seizure, basically. Companies, everybody was really interested in like what just happened after that, happened. And they looked into DNT and they found that DNT, I think it was called DNT, it's something like that. But they found that it really, really speeds up the metabolism of the person. The way like, how a person just like has a core body temperature that keeps things warm. Like this chemical just makes that go way faster, like makes it go into way overdrive. Pharmaceutical companies thought they hit a miracle cure with this. Obesity treatments were already a thing back in the 1920s and 30s. And they thought, hey, if we make pills with this stuff in it, then, we did it. We cured obesity. And so they took this stuff, this explosive, they put it into pills. And they started giving it out to, people who are struggling with their weight, people who are struggling with obesity. And the same thing happened. They lost a lot of weight alarmingly fast and then suffered all kinds of problems, including exhaustion, overheating, strokes, deaths even happened. So that by 1935, these pharmaceutical companies realized this is madness. This is absolutely insane. We don't make any money because our customers die. The obese people aren't benefiting because they either die or they stop taking the pill, realizing that really bad things are going to happen to them, and then regain that weight all back again. Government didn't like it because this chemical that you want to put in bombs was being used on people. That's not great. And so eventually it was just stopped and basically banned. It wasn't even banned. It was just like everybody realized that, yeah, this is a terrible idea. We should do this. Since then, the chemical's been used once or twice more to try to use for like obesity or for like heat purposes. The Russians in World War II tried giving it to some soldiers, in the winter. The soldiers reported, yeah, it really worked, We didn't freeze to death in the winter. But then again, they also lost like 20 kilos of weight in 2 weeks, and they realized that, yeah, it's great that they feel warm, but they're also going to be really underweight to do any fighting. We can look at that and see it as like an example of a past safety or societal failure. And there are a lot of them at that time. Uranium is a famous one. Was used in children's toys in the 1950s. Radon, like 1910s, they were painting it. And all the women who were like working on, the paintbrushes to like paint things with this glow in the dark stuff all got cancer and died. It's like, we see that now. And we see it as like, oh yeah, that was obviously stupid and obviously like a bad idea. Why would anybody, go with that? But it's much harder when you're at that time, when you're at that place and see like, yeah, we're doing something that's just like obviously insane, obviously bad for everyone involved on every level. Why are we doing this? But I think I found one. I think I found one that really does fit into that criteria. And I think, and this is going to be controversial, I think it's the modern way we do employment, just in general. It's hard to begin to discuss where to even start on this. Cover letters is probably the one I feel the most passionate about. Cover letters kind of made sense, in like the 1950s, when unemployment was basically zero. And the average employer, if you wanted to advertise a job, you'd put your thing in the newspaper with a mail address, and then applicants would have to like write into the mail, their whole CV and their whole thing. No photocopies. Remember that didn't really exist for the average person. I'd have to write like their whole life story and then have the letter that says like, oh, this is my personality. See, I'm a normal person. And then, send it off by the mail to the job. And, ultimately they get like 6 applications and decide to hire 3 of them because it's the 1950s, we're rich, we can do that. But they don't make sense when people pre-fill their CVs online and then send it off along with the other 100 applications they've done in that day. And then the employer, just for the employer then to screen out this cover letter through a machine that goes, oh, this cover letter doesn't say the word, I don't know, productivity, scrap. And you have to do it anyway, though, because we got 5,000 applications and nobody can possibly read all of that. Or possibly make even like a sensible choice out of it. And that, plus many more, just ends up with a really awful mental health situation for everyone involved. For the employer, we see huge amounts of complaints about how the internet has affected, the way that they hire people, mostly for the worse. They're going through thousands and thousands of applications all at once from all over the world. Most of them not serious. They're dealing with, having to reject people, which is always a bad feeling for people. En masse, by the hundreds, by the thousands sometimes. They then complain about the fact that they still don't get like the right kind of workers, because you need to like really find like the one specific spot where maybe someone who's right for your job would actually be reading. So you can't like advertise in general, because you're just going to get every single person that ever existed apply. But then they go with like people they know anyway. And you'd think like, if they went hired of, something like increased trust. But we don't see that. Instead, we see that trust, between people is at an all-time low. We see that feelings of community and sense, and that, they can rely on people, are at all-time lows. And then for the employee, it's even worse. When you're unemployed, you are expected to fill literal hundreds, if not thousands of applications per week. You are expected to just lump through hundreds and hundreds of rejections just to, land a menial job. And, I've been thinking about, like Caveman George and caveman like people, what part of like the caveman brain was made to handle being rejected 2,000 times? What part of the caveman brain was meant to, keep rolling the dice over and over and over and over and over and over and over again to always lose? Perhaps it's not a surprise that, when politicians, they talk about the unemployment rate, they talk about like, oh, this many people are unemployed, etc. They actually use a very specific definition of unemployment because it's specifically people who either are registered for like unemployment services, which is a whole other thing I'm not going to talk about now, or they talk about like, oh, people who are unemployed but say they're looking for work. But what about the people who give up? Well, in Britain, the estimate is that about twice the number of people are actually unemployed. But it's just that half of them have, in some sense or another, just said they've given up. Like, they've kind of realized, like, yeah, I'm never going to be employed. Oh, well. Or perhaps they're employed, but like in the gig economy. They work now, driving Ubers or, doing Deliveroo, which requires extremely long hours to make work at all. The average Uber driver, for example, I've read, needs to drive around their Uber for 13 hours a day just to break even. Which is why most of them drive around for like 16 hours or 15 hours. That can't be right. None of that can be good for society, for employers, for government, for the next generation. I don't see any group, anyone who is benefiting from the current employment system. We need to change it. Now, I wish I had a solution. I wish I had the abilities to say like, oh yeah, we could just like cancel the internet when it comes to employment. Because I really do think like the internet is like one of the big culprits here. But that's inevitable. You can't fight it. But I do have one bit of good news on this, which is the subsidy bill. Now, what is the subsidy bill? I've got the BBC up for this. So I've got the BBC saying, new UK laws to sweep away EU state aid rules. All right, it's from 4 days ago. What is it? The subsidy control bill will replace EU-wide state aid rules, which require member states to seek approval for government assistance to firms. Ministers said the rules will allow the government to help companies with grants or loans faster. It has been dubbed the most important bit of post-Brexit legislation yet. And in many ways, probably the single best thing that could have happened post-Brexit. And I actually really, really detest Brexit. But this is actually something that could potentially be very good. Because the way it works basically is it gives a lot more power and a lot more freedom to like local authorities to pursue economic policy, including things like nationalising, including employment rules. I don't know what the solution is to the current UK employment situation and the fact that no one benefits from it. But I'll tell you what, someone somewhere in some council probably does have an idea. And a law hopefully will pass Parliament that allows these people to try and experiment and to try and implement a new thing, to then try and get a change, a benefit from it. Well, that might almost make Brexit, I don't know, not 100% bad. What do you think? Let me know in the comments of the Facebook live stream, as I always make a point of reading them, as I then just whistle-stop tour straight to the final story I have, which is, man, the Euros, right? Now, I'm not a huge football fan. I'm not somebody who's like, oh yeah, football, whatever. But it's really caught my attention this past couple of days for various reasons. Perhaps it was the fact that England beat Ukraine 4-0 yesterday that caught me off guard. because like that's an insanely good result. Woohoo! Or perhaps it was the way England fans treated the German team when we played against them, and the England fans, kind of amusingly, in my opinion, booed both teams. They booed the German team at their national anthem because, they were the opposition, they were the Germans. And, we beat the Germans that one time 70 years ago. So therefore we must always boo them. Woo! And then England fans booed the England team because a bunch of them were kneeling because of like the Black Lives Matter situation, which I even talked about last week. If you want to check out on the Facebook page of Relaks Radio, I highly recommend the happening there. But yeah, this is kind of amusing. Like, the England fans booed everyone. And then when England beat Germany, there's like a picture of like a little child who's like crying, with like the German flag. It's like, oh no, like, the kid's sad. And then all the England fans saying like the nastiest, twisted stuff you could, possibly say about a literal crying child. Don't worry too much though. According to the London Economic, nearly £25,000 has been raised for the German girl mocked by England football fans. Perhaps what really caught my attention though was the Prime Minister. I've made it clear before that I dislike gesture politics. I really just dislike, let me just do like a symbol. It won't mean anything, it won't do anything. No, it's got no change on anyone's life. But I'm doing it anyway because I want to signal that I'm like on your side. Where Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, rolled out on number 10 a gigantic England flag and stood on it, to like, yeah, England. I could talk all about how, he would never have done that if it was like the Welsh team that was doing so well as England is at the moment. I could talk about how he was standing there on like this big giant England flag with like this stupid grin, standing on top of the flag, kind of disrespectful. I could even talk about the fact that, the Tories have become kind of like an English nationalist party. So like this kind of gesture, shows that, they are all, just kind of drunk on English nationalism and going to destroy the union that way. But I won't. What I'm instead going to consciously talk about is the fact that all the pictures of Boris Johnson on that flag only actually showed one half of the flag. Because when you scroll down, look for the Euros, like a bunch of the sponsors for the Euros were all there. Like those Nation West, the bank, and which when you see that bottom half, all you can really think is like, man, damn, that bank must be so strong and so powerful. You could even get the British Prime Minister to make sponsored content for them. I know I shouldn't be laughing, I shouldn't be smiling, but I do. It's just so stupid. It's so ridiculously, like, accidentally corrupt. You can only goddamn smile. Because what else can you do? With everything that's happening, you kind of have to smile or else face depression. What do you think? Let me know in the comment section of the Facebook live stream below. Let me know, I'll be brave. Personal messages. And, you can always comment, of course, on the Relaks Radio app, pages, YouTube, wherever you want to. You could, of course, also try and give me a call. But I won't do that right now because some other show is going to come right after this. And honestly, your time would be better spent, watching that too and seeing what our lovely hosts at Relaks Radio have got to say. However, for me personally, I'm going to do a wonderful thing called Goodbye, and I will see you all again very, very soon. Have a good day.